All right, hello again. This is Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College. I am now going to start going over the textbook from Course Technology, JavaScript, 6th edition by Vodnik and Gosselin. And we're going to start, as you'd guess, right at the beginning with an introduction to JavaScript. Now, I will tell you that with some of the stuff that's in here, is historical in nature, and although I do like history, I'm not going to spend real much time on it. But you can see our objectives here. Explain the history of the World Wide Web. Describe the difference between client-side and server-side scripting. Understand the components of a JavaScript statement. Add basic JavaScript code to a web page. And structure JavaScript programs. So with that, I'm literally going to just jump right in. So JavaScript is supported by all major browsers. So whether you have Internet Explorer, Chrome, Safari, Firefox, Opera, or something else, you're going to have JavaScript support. And some people consider JavaScript to be a programming language, and other people consider it to be a scripting language. It doesn't really matter, because whether you refer to it as a programming language or you refer to it as a scripting language, basically, as I said, is immaterial, just because of the fact that regardless, you do programmatic things with JavaScript, or you can. So in this first chapter, the idea is that we learn the skills required to create and put basic JavaScript into a program. All right? Okay, so if we start talking about the stuff that's in here, really the idea for the internet, all right, although it's basically given a chronology of like the 80s and 90s, as it says, it started with something back here in the 60s called ARPANET, which was going to be a way to link together computers, basically Defense Department computers. And after a while, they also wanted to link together computers that were from educational institutions. Then in the early 90s, Tim Berners-Lee, and if you haven't heard that name before, he's very synonymous with the World Wide Web. He was at a conference in Switzerland, and he talked about a way to cross-reference documents on a computer network. And the way he was going to do this was basically known as hypertext linking, which became hyperlinks. So he's one of the people that is the most, or has been the most, involved with the World Wide Web from the get-go. Now, very interesting point here in our book on page 3. The author says, a common misconception is that the words web and internet are synonymous. The web is only one part of the internet, and it's a means of communication on the internet. So it's not the internet itself. If you don't know how to create hyperlinks, all right, then you weren't around for the first set of lectures that we had on the Terry Falk Morris book, because we've gone over that in a lot of detail. So a couple, terms that you'll have to understand. A web page is a document on the web. All right. Typically, when you have a website, if you want to bring that website up, you'll bring up some kind of a URL, which is a uniform resource locator, and a URL is a subset of a URI, which is a uniform resource identifier. That's a more generic term for things that are on the web. And again, the website refers to the location on the internet where one or more pages and related files lie. You display the page on a computer using a web browser. This should all be stuff that hopefully everybody already knows. If my desire is to go to Rankin Technical College's webpage or homepage, and I bring up in my browser, in the address bar at the top of my browser, I type in www.rankin.edu and I hit enter, what happens is that's going to send what's called a Hypertext Transfer Protocol, or HTTP request, over the internet, where that request will be met by a web server, one of Rankin's web servers, all right, and it'll handle the request, and it'll provide me back directly or indirectly, it'll provide me back that information in terms of what's called a Hypertext Transfer Protocol, or HTTP response. Now, browsers have been around for over 20 years. And as they mentioned there, back in 93, you had Mosaic. Okay? And in 94, you had Netscape, and it was Netscape Navigator, if you remember using that. And that pretty much ruled the roost. As it said, it had about 75% of the market until the later 90s, when Microsoft introduced Internet Explorer. And that was kind of the first shot, the beginning of what are referred to as the browser wars. And in the browser wars, by and large, there were three different combatants in there. All right. There was the W3C, which is the World Wide Web Consortium. They're the overseeing body, and they do a lot of the standards for a lot of the things that are web related. So that was the first one. Okay. Then there was Netscape Navigator. And then there was Internet Explorer. The problem is the World Wide Web Consortium, by and large, what they do is they make recommendations that typically most browsers follow. But back in those days when it was first created, in the early to mid 90s, what happened was the web was exploding so fast that Microsoft and Netscape tried to figure out ways of doing things before there were actual standards that were set up by these. That was the problem. All right? Because Microsoft oftentimes did things one way, and then Navigator would do things another way. And over time, the W3C started to catch up, but by and large, I'm being general here, but by and large, what they did was a lot of the things that they agreed to and a lot of the recommendations that they made, etc., were more on the side of Microsoft than they were on Netscape Navigator. So for lack of better words, IE was winning the browser wars. Now today, there are a lot of different web browsers. Some of those web browsers include what's shown on the bottom of your screen here: Internet Explorer, Mozilla Firefox, Google Chrome. There is also Safari, which is available and it comes standard on any kind of an Apple device, but you can use it for non-Apple also. There's Opera, and there are other ones as well. Now, over time, what happened was that 75% that market share that Netscape Navigator held was basically eaten up by Microsoft, who controlled almost 100% of the market. It's not like that anymore. You can go out and find your own statistics on this, but from the last thing that I read, Chrome has probably got the biggest market share, and IE and Firefox are pretty much battling for second place. Now, when I do things in here, I'm going to exclusively, if I can, be using Chrome. I just think it's the best browser, and it has the most up-to-date features and functionality, and I like it. I'm comfortable with it. So what we have to end up doing here is we have to have a marriage. And it sounds a little weird, but it's even more weird because it's a marriage among three different things. It's going to have to be a marriage of the hypertext markup language that you see on your screen right now, HTML, which define the logical structure of a web page, and cascading style sheets, or CSS, which defines the presentation of a web page, and then JavaScript, which is, again, what most of the stuff in this book is about. And that's quite often is the logic of the web page. All right. Now, HTML, as mentioned right there, is based on a much older thing that was referred to as SGML, or Standard generalized markup language. The thing about standard generalized markup language, all right, it was written in such a general or generalized way, hence the name, that it was used as a template for other languages. But you don't really find much SGML out there. But HTML was an offshoot of SGML. Now, I have shown this in other lectures, but I'm going to bring it up again. My suggestion is if you feel that you're a little bit derelict in any of this stuff, I would start by going out to w3schools.com. And under w3schools.com, if you click to learn HTML, there's an HTML5 tutorial. If you go out there and you choose learn CSS, there's a CSS tutorial. If you go out there and you click learn JavaScript, there's a JavaScript tutorial. And what we'll be talking about toward the end of the class, if you go out and click on learn jQuery, there's a jQuery tutorial. So it's kind of a one-stop shop, for lack of better words. It's definitely not the only site that's out there, but it is a good site. It's a great site. It's a great teaching site. It's done in a very simplistic way, and the recommendation is, if you have any desire, that you can always use the code that are in the examples too. All right? So, this book, again, is not on HTML, but you have to have at least some HTML understanding to be able to use the stuff that's in the book. So, HTML is a tag-centric type of language. And what these tags do, as mentioned right there, is they specify how data in a document is going to be treated by the browser. All right? Most of these tags that are put there will have a beginning tag and an ending tag. Not all of them, but most of them will. In many ways, HTML is very block structured. There is a certain way that you are meant to write it. You put what's called a doc type statement at the top of your code, followed by an HTML tag. And even though it shows it like this, they're within angle brackets, so the HTML are within brackets like this. So you've got your doc type, followed by your HTML, followed by your head, followed by your body. Okay? And that's what we're going to be working with. Now, they show here some common HTML elements. What I do want to mention as far as what's in here, all right, is the first one, not the rest of them, but just the first one that's shown there, article, is actually a newer tag because the newest version of HTML is HTML5. All the rest of the stuff that you see in their body, div, head, the H tag, which can go from H1 through H6, HTML, IMG, nav, and P. All of those things that are in there, and I guess nav is more or less like that too. But article and nav, those are HTML5 tags. And HTML5 is the newest version of HTML, even though I know that they're either coming out with 5.1 or 5.01 if they have not already. All right? So they show you some basic syntax here, and they show you what something like this is going to look like in a browser. All right? Again, if you've already gone through the first part of the class, you should already have an understanding of what's shown on here. Okay, and this is meant to be some kind of a reservations site. And we've got nav in here. We've got a lot of goodies. I should mention to you that what I plan on doing, at least, is taking all of the code for this that's in the book, and let's see, figures, chapter 1. Well, there's the figure, but that's not going to help much. Nope. And I don't know if we have the code for the different chapters or not. It's a solution file, so I don't even know what the heck that is. I haven't looked through any of this stuff yet. can go in here. The problem I'm going to probably have is if I click right here, this is an image. I don't right now have the time or the inclination to key all this stuff in. All right. But if I do later, if I have time or whatever, I'll key that in. But the point is, when you start to create this stuff, as I mentioned, there is a way that you key in HTML. Now, it's a little hard to see here, but let's just look at some of it. There's our doc type statement. I always put my doc type in lowercase, even though the author here puts it in uppercase. Okay, this says it's an HTML5 document. Then you've got your HTML tag. Down here, way down at the bottom someplace would be the ending HTML tag. Then you've got your head section. This head section is all the stuff that's in here is stuff that will not appear directly on the web page. It's used to put a title in there, and that title is what you see on the bar up here. All right. It links together two CSS files, and those two CSS files are used. Those two CSS files are used to provide presentation. Give the color for this and all the other goodies. And also there's a favicon there, and it's hard to see, but there's a little icon that's right there. That's the favicon. That's all in your head section. What appears in the body section, which starts here and ends someplace off of here, I guess, that's the stuff that appears on the page. All right, and there's a lot of different stuff in here, such as there's a div tag. Div is short for division. So it's a bunch of stuff that you can put together and utilize as a unit. The H1 tag, that's right there, that's got the image in there. That's this Hotel Nadama. All right, then there's a nav section. It's got index, nearby, etc. That's what's right here. Those are our links to other pages, and that's in the nav section. Okay, then we've got an article that's going to talk about reservations, and that's going to be probably what's all in here. Now, I don't expect that to make a boatload of sense, but I just want you to start understanding how things are going to be put together. As far as the text editor, well, the one I use is Notepad++, not Notepad as they show there. Notepad++, which is kind of like Notepad on steroids. You can literally go to notepad++.org and download the package for free. There are other tools that you can get that provide graphical user interfaces or GUIs, things like Microsoft Visual Studio, Adobe Dreamweaver, and there are other ones also. The advantages that they have is, again, they're much more graphical in nature, whereas Notepad, Notepad++, and TextEdit, if you're using a Mac, are more textual in nature. There are other text editors. Even Notepad++ will number lines for you, will do color coding based on meaning. Now, a lot of people like to use Aptana Studio 3, there is a free version of that. Other people like Komodo Edit, and there's a free version of that. Again, I'm planning on using Notepad++, and you can use TextEdit, Text Wrangler, there's a BB Edit, there's a bunch of them that are available for the Mac. All right? As I mentioned to you earlier, the most current version of HTML is HTML5. All right? They also talk about XHTML. I've given this little shtick before, but I'll say it again. In the beginning, there was SGML, the standard generalized markup language, but it was so general that it was not used. All right, it was used as basically as a template, but one of the things that came out of there was HTML, the hypertext markup language. And we had HTML1 and HTML2 and HTML3 and HTML4 and HTML 4.01 and HTML 4.1. But then HTML, in many ways, for a few years, was kind of not retired, but it really wasn't used as much. The idea was that HTML, the hypertext markup language, was going to be replaced with a language called XML, the extensible markup language. And as far as the difference between those, working with HTML, there's about 100 or so tags that have predefined meanings. When you work with XML, the extensible markup language, you make your own tags. And that was thought to be the wave of the future. All right. But then to a lot of people, it was too hard to use. It was very clumsy compared to those people who already knew HTML. So then there was going to be an intermediate language that was called XHTML, which was kind of a marriage between XML and HTML. And as it says there, it was once seen as the future language of web development. But again, never really caught on that well. So while all this was going on, there were a couple groups, the World Wide Web Consortium and the WWG, and I can't remember what that stands for, but they both came in and started saying, you know what, maybe we can go back to HTML and make changes to it so we can use HTML the way that we would want to use it. We can make it do things it doesn't currently do. And after a while, the two groups found out that they were both working toward the same goal, so they kind of combined efforts. And that pretty much is where HTML5 came from. But to my knowledge, it's now under the complete oversight of the W3C, which is the World Wide Web Consortium. If you go out to w3c.org, w3c.org, you can find the home page for the World Wide Web Consortium. All right. So, different things that you do when you're working with the web. You can be a web page designer. Now, when you're a designer, you might, if you work in a big enough place, you might write very little to no code. All right, you're more concerned with the HTML and the CSS and graphics tools, different Adobe tools, etc. You might be interested in something like that. All right. If you're in web page authoring, as it says, you're writing a lot of HTML. If you're in web development or web programming, then you're going to be more concerned with working with JavaScript. If you work for a big company, these different jobs may be split between hundreds of people. If you're working for a small company, you might be the web designer, the web author, the web developer, the web programmer, etc. All right. Web browsers contain commands to view the underlying HTML code. Well, what does that mean? That means that if I go out and bring up a web page, like this page right here, and this is a web page, all right, if I right mouse click on this, so I use my right mouse button and I click and I choose View Page Source, this right here, that is all the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript that's right there that makes up this. So again, if you want to do that, you right mouse click on your page in question and you choose View Page Source. Okay? Now there'll probably, if you do that, there'll probably be quite a few things that are in there that won't make a boatload of sense to you right now. And there's probably even some that won't make sense to you after you take the class. That's not what's important. All right? All right, let's keep jumping ahead. And I'm on page, I don't know what page I'm on. How's that? All right, understanding client-server architecture. Slide 16 here. Okay? One thing I want you to understand, if you look at this picture that you see on your screen right here, and I'll go back to the other picture, the other page in just a minute. But if we look at this picture, what you see is a client and a server. This is a computer, but this is just a big computer that's much more powerful than this one. But what I want you to understand and what I want you to start thinking about right now is this is pretty much still the way the client server is drawn out. That said, all right, there are more people today utilizing the internet and utilizing it through a combination of tablet computers and or mobile phones than there are people using desktops and laptops. All right, so when we draw a client, this also includes tablets and it also includes mobile phones. All right, so the first system that they show here is what's called a two-tier system. There could be millions of clients and there's one or more servers. The server is also called a backend. So the client comes in and requests information. And again, that's called an HTTP or a Hypertext Transfer Protocol request. All right, the server attempts to give the browser the information it's requested, and that's an HTTP or a hypertext transfer protocol response. All right, the browser, you at your computer, you, the client, you're known as the front end. The server is known as the back end. All right, so normally the information will be that you want to be in a database, but it doesn't have to be. So the client gives you the user interface. As it says, it gathers the information from the user, it submits it to the server, and it receives whatever results back from the server. Okay? With a real simple site, like maybe you've got a site that it's for your company and you're a very small company, you might have only one server. And it might be able to do everything you want. But imagine a place like, for example, like Amazon. Amazon probably literally has millions of people on its site at any one time, potentially buying something. So their client server system, there's again going to be millions of clients, but there are going to potentially be hundreds or more servers. Typically, when you put all those servers together, either in the same location or maybe have different locations with a lot of servers, and they're called server farms. The web, as it mentions there, was built on a two-tier client-server system where requests and responses happen with, again, that hypertext transfer protocol. Okay? Today, you're more than likely going to have a multi-tier system, at least a three-tier. So what they show here is rather than having one server that can handle all the requests and give all the responses back, instead you've got one server that gets the responses, but it's going to call one or other servers that are going to actually give information then back to that first server so it can send it back to the client. So rather than just having a client tier and a processing tier like you have in a two-tier client-server system, you now have a client tier, a processing tier, and a data storage tier. Okay? So that's all fine and dandy, but where does JavaScript fit into this? All right. Well, a while ago, and you might very well be familiar with what I'm about to say, but many companies didn't have any web presence whatsoever. They didn't have a website. But what their marketing people typically did All right, so again, we're talking about where JavaScript fits into this whole equation here. And as I mentioned in the past, what a lot of people had was they didn't have a web presence. Instead, their marketing department would have an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper that they would fold into thirds, and it was one of those trifold things. All right, it might have been laminated, it might have been in color or whatever, but the idea was that it was just a static piece of paper that they'd hand out to clients. Well, with some of these companies, when they started to get a web presence, all they did was they basically took that trifold and put it out on the web. So it was static. Okay? And static web pages cannot change after they've been rendered by the browser. Okay? Static web pages always end in either .html or .htm for the extension. All right? But that's not what people want today. Today people want dynamicity. They want to be asked a question. What's your favorite color? And you say royal blue. And boom, the background color of your website is now royal blue. So what they want is they want interactivity. They want interactivity and they want interactive web pages and they want interactive websites. That's where JavaScript comes in. It allows things to happen while the program is running. Again, JavaScript is basically a client-side scripting language. You can use JavaScript on the server side, but it's still used primarily on the client-side scripting language. So in other words, it runs right in the browser itself. All right. The scripting engine that's built in to your computer executes the JavaScript code. All right. You've already seen some of this. The key thing here that we have not really talked about yet is if you look at that second bullet. Unlike HTML, hypertext markup language, which is under the control of the W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium, and cascading style sheets, which is also under W3C control, JavaScript is really under the control of the ECMA. And the ECMA is an acronym that stands for European Computer Manufacturer Association. So really, whereas HTML and CSS are under local control or national control, JavaScript is under international control. There are certain things you're not allowed to do with JavaScript. As it says, you can't use it outside of a browser. You can't use it to run commands or execute programs. And the reason for that is they're trying to save you from yourself. And what I mean by that is you're not allowed to do things that could compromise your system. Now, in other classes, you will probably be learning server-side scripting. And with server-side scripting languages, as it says right there, they're executed on the server, as opposed to JavaScript, which is client-side, which is executed from the browser. Here's some of the popular server-side scripting languages: PHP, ASP.NET, Python, Ruby. There's other ones. Java Server Pages, which is JSP, is another one. With server-side scripting, as it says, you can develop interactive websites that communicate with a database that's housed on a server. All right. Server-side scripting language does have its limitations, though. Notice it cannot directly access or manipulate the browser, and it can't run on the client tier because it's a server product. And they're showing this, but what in English, the way that I'm going to look at this is the client makes a request. The web server says, oh, that's a PHP request, so it sends it out to a PHP server someplace. That gives back information to the original web server here, which puts it in a format that the web browser can understand and sends it back there. All right, so that's pretty much what's happening. So a natural question is, which should you use? Client-side or server-side scripting? All right, and the idea is both. When you want to, if you've got a form that you put out on your website, and you want that form to be validated, in other words, you ask a person for information, you want to make sure they put in the information they were asked to put in, okay? Then typically what you'll first do is you'll validate on the client, which means you'll write JavaScript to do that validation. But it's possible that the user has turned off JavaScript. We'll talk about that in a later lecture. Or they're able to skirt around JavaScript. So even though you go and you validate on what's called the client, which is on your browser, when you send it to the server, you're still going to revalidate. The server is a more powerful machine, so it's meant to do more powerful actions because it can do them faster. But you want to perform as much processing on the client as you can because that will alleviate the workload from the server. You want as much as possible, you want what's called a thick client, where you do as much processing as possible on the client. With a thin client, you do little processing on the client. All right, there's different ways that you can add JavaScript to web pages. Okay, you can have scripts right within a web page, or you can use the script element. And I have shown examples of those, so you can see this. Now I got to remember where I put it. but I wrote this back for the JavaScript stuff back in Chapter 14, from the HTML Terry Falk Morris book. All right. Here is an example, this first one here, where we're taking JavaScript and we're embedding it right inside of an HTML document. So we've got script tags right inside of our HTML document. So the JavaScript is in the same document as the HTML. That's considered poor programming practice. You're better off doing something like this, where instead of putting that in there, you put a script tag in that references an external file with a .js extension, and that file holds your JavaScript. It's very similar to the way with CSS. The recommendation is, even though you can add your CSS right in here in style tags. So in here, this would be ads. Even though you can do that, all right, even though you can do that and put that right in the document itself, the recommendation is that you not do that. The recommendation instead is that you do what's called a link right here, rel equal style sheet, href equals styles.css, for example. So what we're doing here is we're bringing in an external file with our CSS. In much the same way, we want to come in and bring in an external file with our JavaScript. All right? We want to take and have everything segregated with one another, or from one another. So the JavaScript will be in its own JS file, the CSS will be in its own .css file, the HTML will be in its own .html file, and it will include script tags if it needs to bring in JavaScript, and it will include link tags if it needs to bring in, the script tag if it needs to bring in external JavaScript, and the link tag if it needs to bring in any external CSS. All right. JavaScript is what's referred to as an object-based programming language. And what that means is that when you use JavaScript, you can use object-oriented features. Okay, and they're explaining it here, but it's a very, very limited explanation. But JavaScript is object-based, which means that you can use object-oriented features in JavaScript, but you don't have to. Other languages, like C# and Java, not JavaScript, but Java, they're object-oriented, which means you have to use objects in virtually everything you do. But there's a lot of predefined or pre-written JavaScript objects that you use in JavaScript. All right? And we'll look at the document object, the window object, the navigator object, etc. as we go on in here. But what an object does is it combines into a single unit data and code that's going to operate on that data. The data are typically known as attributes, and the code that operates on those attributes are typically known as methods. So again, if I created a person object, it would have data like eye color, hair color, height, weight, etc. And it would have methods or programming code that would allow the person to eat and drink and sleep, etc. That kind of thing. All right. We're going to use procedures in here, and in particular, we're going to use what are called functions quite a bit in here to group our code into logical units. And ideally, each function will perform a specific task. If you write those functions inside of objects, then they're known as methods. If you write the functions and they're not in an object, they're known as functions. And again, if that confuses you, I don't mean it to. All right? A property, again, is a piece of data associated with an object. As I mentioned before, like with a person object, it would be height, weight, etc. An argument is information that you must provide to a function or to a method. For instance, if I come home from work and one of my children has very much messed up their room, and I call my youngest daughter Chloe in and I go, Chloe, clean the room. And she looks at me and says, what room? There's a difference between clean the room and clean your room or clean your bedroom. If I have to tell her what room to clean, your bedroom, that's an argument I'm passing to a method called clean. All right? All right. If you want to write directly to a web page, you can use the document objects write method. And we're going to do that very shortly. Okay? And you can write words to it, you can write numbers to it, you can write virtually anything that you're able to write, you can write to it. Here is an example right here. So inside of our script tag, we're doing a document.write, which says what we want to do is we want to write, and this is a P tag, so we want to write a paragraph that says plant choices and then have a line break. Plant choices and then a line break. Then on the next line, 4 hardiness zones. And if you click hardiness zones, you should be going off to that website right there. Then 5A to 6B, and then end your paragraph. So the code you see right there creates the output that you see right here. A couple things to remember about JavaScript. JavaScript is case sensitive. Just get used to making things most of the time in lowercase and you're best off. If you want to add comments to a JavaScript program, if you want a single line comment, you put in 2 forward slashes, and everything to the right of those 2 forward slashes for the rest of that line is a comment. If I want a comment and I want it to work over multiple lines, I can start my comment with a forward slash and an asterisk, and then lines later I can end it with an asterisk and a forward slash. All right. Learn how to write basic JavaScript code. Start with variables. And what's a variable? A variable is a location in memory that holds a value that can vary. That's why the name is variable. All right. When you create a variable, you can give it a value. That's called assigning a value to a variable or initializing a variable. All right. When you do that, these variables are known as identifiers. So anything you create, if it's a variable name, if it's a program name, if it's a function name, if it's a method name, etc., those are all referred to as identifiers. And they have to follow a certain protocol. The identifier is the name you give to the variable, must begin with either an upper or lowercase letter or a $sign or an underscore. Most of the time, you're going to begin it with a lowercase letter. After that first letter, you can use numbers, or you can use $signs, or you can use letters, or you can use underscores. My suggestion is that you use almost exclusively letters whenever you can, and you'll see why as we go on. You can't have spaces in an identifier, and JavaScript has about 63 words that are called keywords and are reserved words, and you can't use those for your identifiers. All right? Here are those keywords in question. So again, these are shown also in your book. Falling a little bit behind here. This is on page 34 of your text. All right. When you do something like this, right here, that line, var cur time, that's what is called creating a variable. I'm creating a new variable, thus the word var, and the name of that variable is cur time, which will be the current time. And notice that the majority of statements that you make in JavaScript, you really should put a semicolon on the end. All right? Now, since I didn't give that a value, technically its value is what's referred to as undefined because it's not known. But if I wanted to, I could have said var cur_time equal and given it a value like we've done right here. That equal sign is not known as the equal sign, it's known as the assignment operator. So if I were to say var cur_time equals 10, that means take the value 10 and assign it to the variable cur_time. That's what it means. Once you have variables, you can do a lot of different things with them. You can combine variables together. All right, you can write out variables, etc. You're going to learn about all this stuff as we go on through here. So here we've got an example where we've got 3 different variables. And then we add together the result of 2 of those variables. All right, these 2 variables here. Oh, there it is, grand total. We adding them together. So we're adding together sales total, which is $47.58, plus shipping, which is 10, which gives us $57.58 for grand total, and then we print it out. One of the reasons the word is called a variable is because you can change the value of a variable. So you can modify its value at any time by just giving it a different or assigning it a different value from the left hand, or using the equal statement and putting the variable on the left hand side of the equal sign. So here we have sales total, and we print out the sales total. Then we have shipping, but then we take the sales total and add the shipping to it, and that's our new sales total. Just another way of doing the same kind of an operation. What we're starting to do in here, what you're seeing, is as it says, we're building expressions. An expression is mentioned right there. It can be a literal value or a variable or a combination of them. But you have an expression because you want to produce a result. So there, this is an expression right here. And it's got 2 variables in it. Okay? All right. An operand are the operands of the variables and the literals contained in an expression. So here we've got operand, operator, operand, operator, operand. All right. Now, I'm not sure exactly why the author decided to bring this up at this time in the book, but JavaScript is what's known as an event-driven programming language. So you can imagine, and this is on the bottom of page 39 in the book, and there's going to be more following that. But if you can imagine, JavaScript is sitting there and it's monitoring your code, waiting for you to do something or waiting for something to happen. For instance, waiting for you to click a button. If you click a button, that's going to do what's called raise a button click event. If you put some code in there to make something happen when that button's clicked, then the code will run. So some events are because of things the user performs. But some events have nothing to do with user actions, such as you can have code that's going to run as soon as the web page is loaded into memory, or when it's unloaded from memory, or at a certain time of day or something like that. This is what's shown on page 40 in the book, and they're showing some of the events to which you can add code. All right, so I can add code, so if I put my mouse over something, maybe it gets bigger or it changes color or whatever, and then when I move my mouse out of there and move it away from there, it goes back to the way it was to begin with, type of thing. All right, so in order to work with events, you have to create what's called an event handler. As it says right there, an event handler is code that executes in response to a specified event on a specific element. All right, and that code will be written in JavaScript. So here are different events. So for an anchor tag, for example, which is an A tag, these are all the different events that correspond to it. For an image, these are the different things. For a form, these are the different things, etc. You notice they all have the word on in front of them. All right. What you're going to see is when we create things using HTML, that when we create different HTML elements, for many of those elements, we'll give them a special name, which is known as their ID. Once we give them their own special ID, and every ID on a web page has to be unique, because then I can use the JavaScript get element, notice no S there, get element by ID. I can use that method to do something special with whatever I just gave that ID to. And you're going to see this again as we go on in here. All right, adding JavaScript code to a document must follow certain rules. You can have as many of these script tags as you want. You can put all your code in one script tag and put it in your HTML file. As I mentioned previously, that's considered poor programming practice, but people do it anyway. You can take your JavaScript code and put it in one or more external files. You can have some code on your page and some code in external files. You can do this virtually any way you want to, need to, have to do it. All right, where you put the script element varies, and it depends on who you talk to. Some people believe that with a script element, it should go at the end of your head section, and other people believe it should go at the end of your body section. We'll talk about that as we go on. Don't worry about it. I've already mentioned you can put your JavaScript in external files. It must have a .js extension and must contain only JavaScript. The advantages are just what I mentioned to you before. Your code is going to be neater. You are able to segregate your code. So you have your JavaScript in JS files, your cascading style sheets in CSS files, and your HTML in HTML files. All right? When you start creating enough of your own JavaScript, and you're using the same functions and things that you create in JavaScript all the time, all right? So if you're using them all over the place in many different programs that you create, then what you might end up doing is taking that code and creating from that code what are referred to as libraries, all right? Just like a library is full of books, a code library is full of functions and routines that you'll be able to use, all right, on an as-needed basis. There are libraries that have also been written too. We'll look a little bit at Node.js and Backbone and Modernizer and jQuery. All right. Finally, they talk in here about validation. We don't validate our JavaScript code per se, but we do validate our HTML code by going here to validator.w3.org, and we can also validate our CSS, and that's going out to what's called Jigsaw, and there's a validation thing out there too. All right, writing valid XHTML code with JavaScript. What they say here is totally true. Okay, everything they say on this slide is true. But if you write your JavaScript in its own external file, you don't have to worry about what this says. We're going to do that from day one because we're going to learn the right way. If you don't do it, there's just more stuff you have to add. You have to put your JavaScript, you have to surround it with these CData things. So the system knows that if it can't understand JavaScript, that it just ignores it. All right, that's pretty much it for Chapter 1. So we talked about hypertext linking. We talked about HTML5. We looked at a 2-tier and a 3-tier, which is also called an N-tier, client-server system. We looked at what JavaScript is, being a client-side scripting language, and why you use it. Okay, and that pretty much is it for Chapter 1. So I will come back in just a couple minutes, and when I do, the plan is to go into Chapter 2, And chapter 2, which starts in our book, on page 73, is going to be on working with functions, data types, and operators. We'll be back with that lecture shortly.